welcome to Next Level Up. Today's guest is Jon Brewton. He's the founder and CEO of Data² AI. He's one of the few operators building AI platforms where explainability, auditability, and actual performance goes beyond merely the hype. From Air Force vet to engineer to AI entrepreneur, Jon's career is a masterclass in combining clarity with computation.
All good.
In this episode, we dig into how Jon's team built the world's only patented hallucination-resistant AI platform. That's a mouthful. And why sectors like defense and finance are using it because they can't afford to play with guesswork. Jon, great to be with you today.
Same here. Really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and chat.
Yeah, it's awesome. I can't wait. That video on your homepage, everybody should go watch it. It's 5 minutes. It's a great use case of his tool. Not that this is an ad campaign, but some pretty cool stuff. But let's rewind before we get into the cool today's stuff. Could you start us off a little your backstory? What led you up? What was the lead up to founding Data²?
Yeah, look, I think my background, like you said, military background, gigantic bifurcated organizations with information siloed in a variety of different capacities. I then leave and go work in the oil and gas industry. Very much the same.
Tiny in comparison.
Yeah, oil and gas is like so analogous to what you would find from a defense or sort of a government organization. Really differentiated, lots of siloed intelligence. People have to work across functions. And at the end of the day, you have a lot of geographical disbursement. There's people and operations that are happening simultaneously in different places around the world. And a lot of my job back in the day, whenever I worked for oil and gas companies as an engineer, and a variety of other sort of odd jobs within structure, was trying to figure out how to make sense of all this disaggregated intelligence. And at the end of the day, that was really the driver for us founding Data². We founded it in September 2023, so we are exactly 3 days away from our 2-year anniversary. But we started with a vision, thank you, vision to build a world where people and machines can make smarter decisions together. Our co-founders are a retired Navy SEAL commander, Chris Rohrbach, Eric Costantini, U.S. Marine Corps and energy industry veteran, and Jeff Dalgleish, who's our chief research officer. Jeff and I worked for Chevron together for a decade. We worked as sort of partners from the Chevron and commercial side whenever he started a company that was knowledge graph-based company. And we just have a lot of sort of sweat equity together. The three overlapping sort of circles here in the Venn diagram are we either work together, we studied together, or we served in the United States military. But it's really sort of that experience that brought us together in this sort of new technology, this new capability that was being released to the market via our GPT models and the commercialization of these things. Was trying to figure out how we could use our experience to really sort of use this technology in novel ways to create something new. Our mission statement as a company is to discover a better way. And, you said it in the intro, but we figured out a better way to use this technology. A lot of it has to do with how we build the data environments that we build, but it allows us to create things that are traceable, auditable, and hallucination resistant. And at the end of the day, we can plug our system into any existing third-party platform capability or analytics platform and tools. We can plug it into any architectural environment. We can use any data that you would like to use, and we can create real trustworthy AI that you can use to automate mission-critical workflows. And we can do that in a way that's trustworthy, is built with integrity, and it's all through a unified interactive application that really helps accelerate how organizations use these capabilities at scale and with real effect.
That's really great. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. Before I do still want to roll back just a bit. When you talk about your 3 circles of Venn diagram overlap, right? Where do you see in that past experience kind of shaped what you thought the concern might have been around risk in AI? Because that, for me, like one of your big things of your product is literally solving that concern. I mean, it's literally one of my biggest concerns with AI.
Yeah, look, I think what's really important to understand is that I think we noticed very, very quickly that if we can't trust the outputs from these things from a systems perspective, there's no ability to actually capitalize on the commercialization of this technology at scale. Like our ability to scale AI in enterprise environments, in high reliability environments where the results matter. There's
Yeah.
a high cost of failure. Think sort of nuclear operations, engineering operations at scale,
Yeah.
defense and intelligence. You don't want to make mistakes there. Well, it was really undercut by the fact that these systems really didn't act with integrity, didn't have any transparency. And I think the other big part that we understood from our experience, having worked as people that were developing systems and tools and capabilities inside of large Fortune 500 companies, was there's sort of this disconnected reality that we need to work through. And I think where the world sees traditional systems in disconnected rows and columns, we figured out that if we use a semantic graph and we really focused on how we connected information within that context, we could go from this 2D reality to a 3D reality, which grounds the connective tissue in our data environments at scale in a very, very tangible way. And it was sort of that was the moment of unlock. And you mentioned early on, we are the only patented hallucination resistant, transparent, and explainable AI platform for enterprise decision making. And the reason we are is because we took our experience with a commercial venture that took place in the early 2010s with a knowledge graph company. We took our commercial experience in building applications within the oil industry and within the defense sector. And we said, like, if we're going to solve these problems, these are imperatives that we have to meet. And we were able to sort of see things through a different lens. I think a lot of people were trying to iterate from transformer models. We were trying to iterate through them and around them. And we
Yeah.
weren't trying to build something that was sort of structurally, architecturally tied to that infrastructure. We were trying to find a better way to transact with these systems,
An
as we're
actual,
sort of asking questions. Yeah.
yeah, an actual solution to the problem, which is, it seems novel to say that, but I
Yeah.
think that is the critical piece and what differentiates you from a lot of the people out there. So one of the things I think that you're pointing to for me is enterprise data at scale is hard to ultimately wrap your hands around, whether you're using AI, ML, you name it. So talk a little bit about, because I one of the things I look at the review demo is just how that 3D model allows you to consume a hell of a lot of data, but more importantly, ultimately get the actionable data, because that's the biggest problem when you have just so much data, it becomes noise. So you want to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really hit on something critical. It was one of the things that we realized really early, working in the size of companies and agencies and stuff that we came from, like we're not at a loss for data right now. It really doesn't matter what the industry context is or, what problem we're trying to solve. There's probably more data than we need. The hard part is trying to understand the connections in that data that matter. At the end of the day, like how those connections manifest really determine your ability to sort of reason with them, through them, around them, and problem solve within that structure. And that's not something that natively happens. A lot of people take sort of data outputs from relational databases, re-engineer them, do manual joins, try to seed context within the structure, how they connect things. This is what Palantir does, right? With their own ontology framework that they apply to things. But whenever you do that, you have to continually re-engineer the information as new information comes in. You have to continually build depth in. Every time you ask a question a different way, the context gets reset. There's all these sort of problems within that sort of context.
Yeah.
And we found that graphs really unlock the ability to connect things in a super meaningful way so that we could distill an ocean of information to the constituent parts that mattered for the problem that we were trying to solve at that moment and within the context of that problem space. And so we take a very sort of problem specific view of data environments. Like we'll have a large graphical environment that we'll build for our customers. As an example, one of our commercial customers bought 8 companies and we took all of that data and we put it into some master graph.
Yep.
But we do targeted recall from that graph on the basis of the problem we're trying to solve, connected to relational databases where we do tactical extraction on that recall. So we run our own embeddings models in parallel to sort of our graph models and the subgraph elements within that larger context that are relevant to the problem that we're trying to solve. So as an example, if we wanted to figure out how to route an invoice more effectively from company A to company B within the structure of this master entity, well, they have two different chart of accounts, they have two different contract bases, they have two different vendor pools or vendor designations, but their vendors could overlap directly. Trying to whittle out where it goes, how it's coded, how it gets routed financially in the system has to do with an understanding of both of those things simultaneously. You need to
Right.
understand what's different and what's the same. And then ultimately, from a goal perspective, how we're trying to use that information to sort of bring everything together. And so we sort of really take this problem specific approach to information. We don't data lake anything. We can essentially sit on top of or next to any applications that exist, any database environments that are already built. But as long as we have the subject matter expertise to understand what information is relevant to the queries that we're trying to run and the problems that we're trying to solve, we're able to sort of go into those environments as needed. And so we keep a sort of graph as a representation of the problem space or the network that we're operating in. And then we do real sort of targeted extraction and subdivision within that context so that we can get to the right pieces of that information in this space and the right pieces of information here. We don't have to move anything. We don't have to recode anything. We
Yeah.
can do disambiguation on top of already existing repositories. We can inherit ontologies, schemas, taxonomies. Like it doesn't really matter. And we can act as sort of the Rosetta Stone layer across really differentiated but connected information. And graphs really give you a lot of leeway whenever you start to build these things. You got to do it right, but
Yeah.
they give you a huge upper hand if you do it right.
One of the things that I really thought was compelling about your cyber, I mean, I know it was a synthetic demo, but
Yeah.
also the fact that you could tag that at different layers of, in that case, security, secret or top secret clearance. And that to
Yeah.
me opens up the door, for instance, like between the police and the FBI and DEA, like, oh, now all of a sudden you have interdepartmental
Operability. Yeah.
observability, operability, and they don't have to have everything, but you can give them the stuff that they actually are cleared for and can do, and then get value from that.
It's really funny. So contextually, that's a huge problem, especially within giant organizations. Everybody will
Yeah.
kind of understand that implicitly. But whenever we were building the first version of what we were building, we were like, well, we need to solve this problem. We sort of used the 9/11 commission report when we talked about intelligence sharing and how it gets
Yeah.
siloed and it's really difficult, you presidential decrees or, whatever to get access across the CIA to the FBI and
Yeah.
how silly that was. And it was like, could we build a system, just in structure that allowed us to, with the right knowledge and with the right understanding of the information as it exists in each one of these independent silos, do targeted extraction and recall and aggregation on the basis of query. And we thought that was a solved problem at the government level. And turns out it's not. It's still a huge problem that people are fighting through. It's certainly still a huge problem in the enterprise context. Working at a company like Chevron for 15 years, you trying to find the right information is usually not the problem. The problem is getting access to it.
Yeah.
You know where it sits. You got to, query somebody, get some manager, some, vice president of a business unit to give you access to it. Well, the government still has the same problem. And so while we started in theory trying to solve something that we thought was already a solved problem, from a governmental context, turns out there's a huge amount of utility in that, and so it's a big feature of what we do and how we do what we do. But we're on a huge program of work with the federal government called ICON, which is essentially an intelligence interoperability and cyber program of work with all DoD agencies and then the FedCiv law enforcement agencies. And they don't share information with one another. And one of the biggest goals was, do we create a data lake or can we create a tool that can do real targeted entrance, extraction, review, and then aggregation of intelligence on a secured basis across these environments without having to sort of offshore that information into a neutral environment.
Yeah,
And easier said than done, but it is a big feature of what we do.
that's great. And what's your normal client reaction when they can see that explainability in action?
It's huge. I think we gave a presentation at LSU last week. We're partnered with Louisiana State University College of Engineering, and we were out there talking to regulators. And regulators, one of the questions I asked is, do you think it's possible to use today's tools, today's AI tools in a commercial context to do sort of unified intelligence interrogation across multiple documents and spreadsheets and database instances through some unified um, user interface or some unified tool? And it was really funny because I think 75% of the room said yes. They raised their hand. They're like, yeah, that should be easy. We can use ChatGPT for something like that. That's not how that works. Like in context, there's sort of a lot of misplaced trust from a market perspective
Yeah,
in the real capabilities of these tools. And so when we go in and kind of show people what we can do, whether it's inheriting security classifications, policies, or encryption from a given document, a given repository, a user query, the ability to sort of subdivide an information environment on recall, making process very easy and cheap, and being able to say exactly what we recalled from the system, how it was used by a language model, what was returned, the fact basis of that information, being able to cite and source all the way down to the data record level. We're not talking about you can find this information in spreadsheet X. You can find it in workbook, tab 3, name this, row whatever,
yeah,
column X. This is exactly where you'll find it, or on page whatever, paragraph whatever, sentence whatever. So
yeah.
we're talking about real attribution that's meaningful in the use of these tools. And people tend to look at that and go, oh, but it didn't really know that was possible. That's really interesting. What can we use this for? And the answer is, virtually anything you'd like to
Yeah.
put your mind to, but it's a meaningful change of pace.
It's really cool because again, most tools in that case, right? They inform you the things you didn't know, and then when that becomes available, you see all sorts of new possibilities to go. Oh, we can solve
Yeah.
that problem we've been working on for 7 years and never had something to get us to the other side. That's really cool. So, besides the hallucination, which for me, it's just my opinion, but it's probably the biggest AI myth you're debunking with your platform. What other pieces do you think you guys are kind of putting a stake in the heart of some of the big AI myths?
Yeah, look, I think explainability is a myth. Whenever people, sort of in the market talk about it, explainability can't be created because all sort of AI, whenever it runs at scale, runs in its own sort of capacity and
Yeah,
behind its own sort of black box. Well, that's not true. The interface you sort of use and the way that you do that work scales like in every direction if you do it right. And
yeah,
we just happen to sort of take a different approach to it. We really pay attention to the data layer whenever we're doing what we do. But it's it's one of these things where if you can say this is exactly what we passed this system, this is what was used by it, we can sort it and cite it down to the sort of individual elements within the structure of a broader document environment or database, the context associated to it, why the system came to the answer that it came to, and being able to sort of audit that chain of custody from a cognition perspective is really differentiated. And the crazy thing is, like, the first sort of test we did of this was really interesting. We did a case study with CIA training data. So we got it from an academic institution and a person that runs a training program for graduating analysts that are doing sort of their first bit of work for the agency. And the average sort of score on this workflow was somewhere around 70%. There'd be a team of 6 people. It would take an average of 6 weeks to work through it. Fairly mediocre results, but it was
yeah.
really differentiated intelligence. It was, finite, SIGINT, OSINT, like we're looking at all kinds of
Everything.
human intelligence, like everything, just, a big dump of files, no
Yeah, yeah.
structure, figure it out,
Good
and
luck.
this professor, we had talked to him and he goes, well, like I'm really interested to see your tool work. If I gave you some training data, would you throw it in and see what you can get out of it? I said, sure. Called him back the next day. We'd ingested the information. We had structured that information in a really meaningful way, we thought, but we didn't really know much about, the rights, the wrongs, the truth, the inaccuracies within the data, because there's some misleading things that are happening there. And the guy called us back 6 hours after we sent him access to it, and he goes like, I don't know what you did, but this can't be right. We were like, of course it's not right. We just did it yesterday. So like, it's not right. And he goes, no, it's right. It's 100% right. It is getting the exact pieces of the puzzle that are contextually relevant to the questions that I'm asking, returning the fact basis of it. I've never seen anything like this. And for us, that was like a big light bulb moment where we kind of built something we thought was going to be fit for purpose for a single industry and a single industry application. We were looking at abandonments in the oil and gas space. It was kind of like our background and in a very tangible and recent way. We applied it to this, and once we got that answer, we were like, let's see what else we can throw at it. And it was sort of through that exploration that we got to sort of the patent positioning. But I think that explainability is really game changing. And I'd say the other thing that we do that really sort of dispels some myths, I think industry wide people will say that you have to iterate from the context of a GPT interface and a transformer model, and you have to sort of work in that statistical framework to try to reduce uncertainty in that framework. Everybody knows that graphs give you better efficacy rates on retrieval, just native retrieval. That's not arguable at this point. If you're taking a traditional RAG approach versus a graph RAG approach, really there's a difference. It's almost 100% better natively, but graphs are complicated. They're really hard to build. Like, we're partnered with Neo4j as a sales partner, and Neo4j is probably the most prolific graph company in the world. Their average time to value for their customers is anywhere from 12 to 18 months because it takes a long time to build a really good enterprise ready graph. That's just true. The other day, we have this tool called Review Studio, where we actually ingest large amounts of data at scale and create enterprise-ready graphs. We did 140,000 wells of documentation. I can't remember the total size of this environment, offshore environment, Gulf of Mexico, as sort of a test case. We ingested all of that and created an enterprise-scale graph in 4 minutes.
Wow.
And so, we're talking about orders of magnitude difference, even if it's slow.
Yeah.
And I think graph accessibility is going to be a big part of what we see in terms of efficacy as we sort of build into what is the next version of our AI use case reality. But I think that's a big myth. Graphs are hard and they don't really scale. Well, I think we solved that problem.
Yeah.
And
sounds like
there's a lot to do with our patents and how we do what we do. But I think that's probably the three biggest things. Hallucinations can be managed. Explainability isn't a myth, and we can create an enterprise-ready graph in seconds.
Yeah, it's that. I'm sorry, I was just a little shocked. The 4 minute thing, I was like, okay, a couple days, even that's amazing, dude. That's really crazy. Yeah. So let's cast the net a little bit, right? The old magic wand time. What's next for Data²? What do you think the vision and your obstacles might look like in the next couple of years?
Yeah, look, our vision is to build a world where people and machines make better and smarter decisions together. We're not trying to replace people. We're trying to give them tools and capabilities that scale their capacity and, in fact, sort of scale their ability to generate value for their companies. And so that's our focus. We're working in high reliability industry now, the places that we really understand, oil and gas, energy at scale, defense and intelligence. But the good part about both of those environments is they're really representative of a bunch of different vertical markets because of the size and scale of the entities that are operating in that space. Like Chevron itself is a top 5 logistics company, or top 50 logistics company in the world. And so if we solve anything from a logistics perspective for a company like Chevron, Shell, Exxon, we're solving something that we can sort of move into different markets. And, that's sort of the real essence of what we're trying to do is identify what are those logical next markets to tackle. We think there's a ton of runway in the industry space, but as a byproduct of that, we think that finance, supply chain, cybersecurity, are really areas of growth for us, and really
Right.
financial services at scale. Like how do we value an asset effectively? Well, normally that takes 5 people, 2 weeks to look through, 10 boxes of documentation while we're doing some evaluation. Well, what if we could do that in 10 minutes? Does that change the overall efficacy of our ability to assess an asset at scale and its sort of fitness within the portfolio? How do we invest in things, I think, is the next sort of big thing. People are already doing this with sort of GPT wrappers and creating their own agents that are picking market things based on
Right.
market dynamics. That's great. But if we really sort of narrow in on how do we value an asset or an investment, what's the long-term run on it? How does it correlate to the market? What's its value? Is strategic use? Answering those questions is a little tougher because you're pulling in a lot more information to get a more well-rounded understanding of that sort of value chain.
Yeah.
And we see those as like the logical next places we'll play. Healthcare would probably be a third area outside of sort of finance and supply chain or logistics spaces, just because of the personnel, or sorry, the person personally identifying information
AI.
and the requirements you have to operate within that space from a security and encryption and the management of information. Like our tools are really fit for purpose for application there. We kind of hang our hat on like, well, if we can build something and deploy something for the FBI or the CIA, we can probably build something for a healthcare
Yeah.
company
For HIPAA.
or a hospital.
Probably. Probably. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's the way we kind of look at it. We're really trying to scale our business over the next year and a half. We've had really good movement in year one to year two. We'll probably 5x our revenue from year one to year two, taken in,
Great.
roughly around 6.25 mil in seed capital. We'll be positioning for growth from a commercial perspective over the course of the next year. And I was just trying to get the word out to people that, hallucinations, you don't have to deal with them if you don't want to. Explainability isn't a myth, and we can help you create something that's sustainably good and fits within the structure of how you already categorize, codify, and use information in your business. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that we're going to focus on over the next year or two.
Hopefully, you got people lying around the corner because I certainly, as a data guy, would definitely be adding you to the stack. John, it's a refreshingly grounded look at Gen AI when it comes, it's really built from a ground of integrity right off the rip. And really appreciate your clarity and the work you guys are doing to make AI smarter and safer. It's gonna be a huge piece of, I think, tools moving forward. So great job, and thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Really appreciate it.